All right, so let's start now our panel presenting the results of the Monitor for Circular Fashion Report 2021. I will be also now sharing the floor actually with many speakers. Let me just introduce them. Nicola Tagliafierro, Head of Global Sustainability at Enel. Bettina Heller, Program Officer at UNEP. She's connected online. Hi, Bettina. Mauro Scalia, Director Sustainable Business at EURATEX. Thank you, Mauro. Laura Balmond, Lead Make Fashion Circular at MacArthur Foundation, connected online. Hi, Laura. And Iria Mouzo Lestón, Head of Circularity at INDITEX, connected online. Hi, Iria. So before sharing and discussing the results, let me also say many thanks to Professor Francesco Perrini, who unfortunately will not be here today for a very urgent meeting, but he really wanted to share with you his gratitude for being here, and I would like to welcome you again in SDA Bocconi. Francesco Perrini is the Sustainability Lab Director of SDA Bocconi, and Sustainability Lab is hosting the Monitor for Circular Fashion. So thank you, Francesco. All right, so let me now actually go to the presentation of the results, the main results, since the report is more than 90 pages, so I will just highlight the main results that you will find, by the way, in the report. So on the platform, you will find the link to access the Monitor for Circular Fashion website, and over there you can download actually the report. So let's go through the main contents. I will guide you basically through the 5 chapters of the report. Let me just thank once again all the companies of the Monitor for Circular Fashion 2021. As I mentioned to you, this is a research project and a community of companies led by SDA Bocconi School of Management and powered by Enel. Overall, 14 companies participated to the research activity, and we also have 2 companies that are part of the KPIs committee that have been revising the KPIs, confirming this first release of the KPIs. We have more than 40 actually already published on the website. All right, so which was our starting point? Basically, our starting point was to understand which was the impact, and there are actually many impacts coming from the COVID-19 on the fashion value chains. We'll discuss about this, especially with our conversation with the UNEP. I will just introduce now the topic, but let me just highlight this. Of course, the COVID-19 has been definitely having some consequences on the consumers. They're much more careful now. They're much more interested about sustainability. We had the time to open the wardrobes and see what's in there and really think about what is essential and what is not. But on the other side, the pandemic has caused major economic, social, and environmental consequences, including a significant increase in textile waste production, and relevant sources predict that the pandemic may bring to about 60 billion pieces of fashion products to be unsold in 2021. So the transition from a linear to a circular economy is urgent. This is something that we need to manage, and the linear approach, by the way, is still dominant. And there are many barriers that are limiting the transformational change towards circularity. So this was our starting point, the starting point of the monitor, and that has been founded as a project on the belief that enhancing dialogue among different stakeholders, influencing policymakers to have specific regulations and incentives for circularity, and fostering education are the key factors that we need to implement and accelerate the change towards circularity. So let me enter for a moment into the methodology. And the results of the report come from 2 different methodologies. The one developed by SDA Bocconi to identify over 30, actually we reached over 40 KPIs for fashion, tailored KPIs for fashion. And the identification of the KPIs was based on primary and secondary data. So thanks again to the companies for providing all these inputs, also during the interviews. The desk research was carried out on over 30 updated reports on circular fashion, and there was an online survey, semi-structured interviews to the 14 companies part of the community. And then we have the methodology developed by Enel that allow us to have aggregated data, quantitative data on corporate and energy KPIs, and it will be better explained by Nicola Tagliafierro later. So I will leave it to you, Nicola. So let's go to the main results now. So we enter into chapter 4, the one of data analysis. So fashion industry analysis. We have identified at the end, they are a little bit tiny here, but in the reports you will see them well, 14 circular fashion activities that can be divided into 5 business models. Sustainable inputs, so which includes the use of circular materials, but also other ways to optimize the resources as inputs. So we mean raw materials, energy, and water, such as design for circularity and on-demand production. Life extension, which means finding ways to extend the life of the product, such as modularity, offering repairing services and re-commerce, and end of life, which includes recycling, but also upcycling and downcycling, sharing, so peer-to-peer platforms, and product as a service, so basically rental. We understood from the analysis that the most diffused business models at the moment are basically the one of sustainable inputs and end of life. And they have also for the future a big potential, and a huge potential is also coming from the other business models. But at the moment, they are not so implemented. Going on, actually, you will see here all the activities, the 14 activities, throughout the different activities of the value chain. So upstream circularity activities, such as design for circularity, on-demand production, circular inputs, are currently much more diffused, so upstream than downstream activities, such as repairing services, rental, re-commerce. So this is a first big message. In order to improve the circularity performance, companies must find new ways to engage final users, and building long-term relationships with them can help and will help facilitating product take-backs in order to achieve a higher resource efficiency. As we mentioned also before, technologies are crucial, technologies are essential, and transparency and traceability may be considered as real enablers for sustainability and circularity. So that's why we are here talking about also traceability technology. So we are discussing about circularity, it's true, but we need to start from having the right contents and having the right information on the product in order to get to circularity, to manage the resources, in order to even get to the end of waste. So considering waste as a new resource. Technologies may be fundamental enablers, and when asking about the most relevant technologies to enhance circularity, companies identified some key technologies for traceability, blockchain, RFID, artificial intelligence, and Internet of Things that, by definition, are transversal to all the activities of the circular fashion value chain that may be applied into all the activities. And then we have the technologies for circular processes, and they are more specific for some of the activities of the value chain. And then you will notice that we also have the product passports that it's in between the technologies for traceability and technologies for circularity. There are many advantages, several advantages that may come from implementing these technologies as enablers for circularity. Among them, the companies identified efficiency improvements, monitoring energy consumption and material flows, enhanced decision-making, data sharing, more efficient recycling, waste management, improved logistics, inventory management, and collection planning. Of course, transparency and instant tracking of both materials source and the social aspects as well, and more information available to the final users at the end, and this is what we need. But many challenges are still to be faced and considered in order to see the acceleration that we need to see. For instance, costs of some technologies coming from the lack, mainly of economies of scale, energy need, privacy and security, digital trust, lack of interoperability, lack of regulatory framework, data collection complexity and costs. And we'll discuss about all this actually during the 3 days together. So this is an introduction to aspects that we will see also later on in day 2 and day 3. We then went to the circular trade-off because we understood that circularity will bring many advantages, but there are also many trade-offs that we need to solve and consider and challenges. Let me go through the main trade-offs. They are both operational, environmental, economic, and quality trade-offs. Let me make an example here. An example of an operational trade-off for circularity will be that, of course, by asking the consumers, the final users in this case, to bring back the products in store and to activate take-back schemes will be good, because then we can activate a new life cycle with that product. But it's also true that we have operational complexities coming from there. And there is also an environmental consequence because we may have additional CO2 emissions that are coming from reverse logistics. Another example of an environmental trade-off of circularity is the fact that in the future we will see more and more a higher number of fibers that are also recycled fibers, maybe synthetic recycled fiber, which is good. We want to see more recycled fibers around, but it's also true that we still need to solve the microplastics issue. So once again, there are trade-offs that we need to consider. Most relevant obstacles that are coming from the company's point of view in circular fashion, once we think about what to solve, which are the obstacles that are also limiting the potential of circularity and the circular business models. Costs, it's at first, let's say, in the top list. Availability of technologies and infrastructure, external and internal cultural obstacles. So it's not just about the availability of infrastructure, but it's also about changing the mindset of the managers and the employees that work in the company, but also external cultural obstacles that are related also to the consumers, the final users. Law and regulatory obstacles, availability of external and internal competences, and we are in the right place, so we actually are taking care of this, and we know that we have a big responsibility as universities and business schools as well. So largely all companies at the end, and this is the cherry on the cake, confirm that we need to go in that direction, and that there are definitely many advantages that are coming from circularity. It's an interesting point that the first on top is improved brand reputation and increased final user loyalty, which is not just to say, okay, so our image will look good. Here we are actually saying that we need to change the relationship with the final users. We need to build a new relationship with them by taking care and in taking care of the product also after selling the products. Repairing services, care and maintenance services are actually what end users expect from companies at every positioning and in every business model. So this is something that companies understood. This is an advantage, but of course they need to take care of this. New business opportunities, and this is also coming from synergies among different industries, new jobs, especially in the medium term, and cost reduction, especially if we think about the efficiency of the resources used. All the companies understood that through efficiency they can generate also better economic performance. And finally, in chapter 5 of the report, what we discussed a lot within the meetings of, and also the research of the Monitor for Circular Fashion, we wanted to develop a roadmap and suggest concrete actions that companies, but also other stakeholders, could and should put in place in order to accelerate circularity. We call them innovative solutions, unlocking circular fashion opportunities. And here they are. The following priorities to increase circularity performance may require both, as you can see, managers' actions, joint industry actions, and policymakers' actions. And here, it really is the case to say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. There is no other way. And in order to accelerate circularity, we need collaboration among stakeholders. Some actions are at micro level, managers' actions such as measuring and assessing circularity, and this is what we have been discussing previously also with the Circular Fashion Manifesto, engaging final clients and users in circularity initiatives, as I mentioned. And some actions are at macro level, so we need joint industry actions too, involving all the players of the fashion pipeline. Increasing the level of traceability and transparency of the fashion value chain is one of them. And it requires companies understood that they, of course, need to be engaged and they need to develop internal tools. But this is also something that they need to do all together with joint industry actions. And once again, we are here discussing about this. The UNEC project is an example of this multi-stakeholder approach that we need. And resolving circular fashion trade-offs, operational, environmental, economic, and quality trade-offs, as we mentioned, is the main step ahead. So once we will be able to do this, then we'll be also able to scale up circularity projects and circularity pilot projects. So the policymakers are also into the discussion. And what the companies of the Monitor for Circular Fashion believe should be the priorities on the policymaker side, from the policymaker actions, they're the following: improving the collection of waste, accelerating industrial symbiosis, and develop harmonized EU-wide end-of-waste criteria. So basically, these are the main findings out of the monitor. You will find much more, actually, in the report. And you will also find in the report the Circular Fashion Manifesto that you just heard. So what we asked to do to all the companies of the monitor is to basically select an activity of the circular fashion value chain and by commitment, as we saw. We have concrete actions for these commitments, concrete tools, and also related KPIs in order to reach the goals. And which are the next steps? Well, the next steps, as we already mentioned, thanks to the presentation of the Circular Fashion Manifesto, is that we will actually go into the implementation of the KPIs. We'll be testing the KPIs. We'll be maybe reviewing some KPIs. And in the next steps of the monitor, we'll continue working on expanding the community to consider also other product categories that have not been considered yet, in order to be representative of all the fashion value chains. And we'll continue discussing and encouraging also governments to adopt harmonized policy framework to support circular fashion. So we will share the point of view of the companies, all the companies of the Monitor for Circular Fashion. So let me thank them once again. I will say that this is something that we wanted to really share with you. So I'm really representing the companies now. Let's discuss, I will say, about the results of the Monitor for Circular Fashion Report 2021 with our speakers. I invite you once again to visit the website sda-bocconi.it/circularfashion in order to download the report if you like to know more, and we'll be happy to interact here during this event, during the lunch of coffee breaks, but also online with the chat. So I remind you, if you like to make comments, please write us using the chat, using also the ask a question to the speaker option, and we'll get back to you. All right, so this is the moment actually to introduce Nicola Tagliafierro, Head of Global Sustainability at Enel. Will be discussing about the role of energy to reach the circular fashion targets. So I invite actually Nicola to join me here on the stage. And Nicola, please bring us into the new legislation actually that, and the new targets that we have. We need to reach quite important goals by 2050. So how do we get there? Talking about especially the energy KPIs. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Francesca. For us, it's an honor to be here and to be part of this project and this journey with you, with Bocconi, and with all companies. My name is Nicola Tagliafierro, and as you said, I work in the sustainability. We do sustainability for Enel, myself and my team. Let's start from the important things you just mentioned, and what is currently at the moment, what are the targets at the moment for the European Union. We are looking at reaching the 55% of reduction of CO2. And we should actually reach the carbon neutrality for 2050. Those are very challenging goals, and the fashion industry is extremely impacted in the sense that we analyzed, but we also looked into important global researches, and there is an important research for McKinsey that looked at how important is the role of energy into the decarbonization for the fashion industry. If we think that the fashion industry impact for the 4% of the global CO2 emissions, which is a very important weight into the global impact, and considering that the 63% of those 4% we just mentioned is due to energy issues. So it means that looking at energy aspects like energy efficiency, renewable energies, and of course efficiency into material processing could actually impact up to the 63% of the total reduction. This is an important starting point because the circular economy is extremely connected to this point. And is extremely connected to this point because the first model of the circular economy is a sustainable input. And looking at energy means looking at sustainable input, exactly as it is looking with the materials that we normally use into the process. And once we have very clear what is and what are the targets on the market, it is very important on the other side the role we have today and the extremely important role that the monitor has today. And is connected to the metrics, the measurement. Those are really the key issue of all the improvement process we can think to start together. And if we do not measure, we cannot improve. If we do not measure, we cannot take the right decisions. If we do not measure, we cannot even communicate properly to the market, because otherwise any project, any kind of projects can be communicated as a sustainability project, but it is not the right way. This is very connected to what was called greenwashing or circular washing. We need to do sustainability, but we need to do sustainability with things that really impact our business. And this is the reason why really is really important when measuring and this project. And there are also market-recognized tools, like, for example, the greenhouse gases protocol, which is able to measure and give really an impact of what our projects and our commitment is bringing to to the business and to the reduction of our impact. Same thing for the sustainability report. But in the same time, the role of Enel into the market is extremely important for the business and the public administration. We wanted to develop internally also a model that was able to measure the level of maturity of circular economy. Of course, into two big dimensions. One dimension is connected to the global company, so the corporation. One other into the energy. Of course, Enel has a specific know-how into energy, and clearly we used and developed that specific know-how. We did this methodology that is called the Circular Economy Report that we used into the Monitor for Circular Fashion, applying to the companies part of the monitor. And we have done also an important, let's say, credibility and developing process. Because, for example, we are currently accrediting at Accredia this model to make this model become a market standard. So available at as many companies as possible, as many public administration as possible. And as I was anticipating before, it has two souls. The first soul is corporate, so it's taking all the value chain of a company in consideration, from procurement, design, waste, of course, the energy, and logistics, etc. On the other side, there is another very detailed index and measurement that is going to focus on the energy into four big dimensions: renewable energy, energy efficiency, energy management, and enablers. And the important thing that through let's say solutions like this, it is also possible not just to measure, but also to identify a roadmap of improvement. That is really the key point of all our commitment. But let's enter now on the results of the application of this methodology into the report. What we analyze through the comparison of the average results, aggregating the data of the companies with the other data we had into the already analyzed in the last years, emerged that there is a higher level of score in terms of corporate due to important design, repair, and take-back projects that are currently in place. In the same time, also energy is not very far from the average of also the other companies, cross-sectors we analyzed so far. But great potentials in terms of CO2 saving and great potential in terms of energy saving. This is very important because this identifies the fact that the average of CO2 saving is higher of the average we have in portfolio. Identify that for the fashion industry, there is a lot of potential in decarbonizing through energy. And that's very important to know, because this is also an important work of awareness we are doing today. So there are great potential, as we said, and the score we started analyze can reach for the energy side from 28 up to 50. It means that can even double thanks to work on, for example, increasing the renewable energy. Only the 12.5% of electricity was produced through self-generated electricity. So we are talking about PV panels, even available technology, something that we can do tomorrow and is also available at reasonable prices. So there is nothing to develop or nothing to not economical to do. Same thing for the electric mobility. But how I'm closing saying exactly the message we just mentioned before. So while the research is going on, while and it is important that this research is going on and new technology become available, let's work on what we have concretely, what we have and we can do now, and on what, returning on the measurement point, on what we can measure and can have a strong impact on our company. So what are we waiting for? That's the message that I leave. Thanks much.
Thank you, Nicola. And so you'll find much more in the report. So unfortunately today we'll not have so much time to really dedicate enough space to all the elements that we have in the report, but actually we'll take a moment now to discuss the main findings of the report with a great panel of experts, and they all have been participating to all the activities of the UNEC project, starting from Bettina Eller, Program Officer of UNEP. UNEP is United Nations Environment Program. And to Bettina, hi Bettina. Thank you so much for being with us today, even if virtually, but it's like having you here. Hi, Bettina. So I would like to ask you, first of all, what is the UNEP perspective on circularity? And let me mention that in the report of the Monitor for Circular Fashion, we have been mentioning an important report that UNEP has been publishing in 2020. It's called Sustainability and Circularity in the Textile Value Chain, Global Stocktaking. So please tell us a little bit more about your perspective, the UNEP perspective on circularity, and especially there was a very interesting section in the report dedicated to the impact of COVID-19 on the garment and footwear value chains. We'd like to focus on this specific aspect a little bit more, and thank you so much. Great report. I would suggest this as a source to all of you.
Thanks so much, Francesca, and it's a pleasure to see all of you virtually today. Really nice to be connected, and it was really interesting to already listen to also what Francesca and Nicola were elaborating on. So when diving into the UNEP perspective on circularity, I think what is important to note is that we always talk about circularity in the textile value chain. And thanks so much. We can go already to the next slide. So why do we talk about value chain? Basically, it really responds to what both Francesca and Nicola were saying in terms of having a very holistic life cycle thinking perspective. Because as Francesca said, there are trade-offs that are also expected to happen when we move towards more sustainability and circularity. So it's important that we look at the entire value chain, and that all the measures that we are proposing and taking actually, we also take into account how they affect other stages of the value chain, but also how they can enable other stages. And maybe also to clarify that when we talk about value chain, this really means that we don't only talk about sort of the stages, be it, I don't know, cotton cultivation through to the preparation of fibers, through to the textile production, putting the actual items together, then the distribution and retail and use. But it also means talking about the actors that either get value from the system or are also deprived of value. If we talk about the communities, for instance, that live close to textile factories. But also we have to think about let's say the parts that shape the system. So the business models of the companies, the consumption habits, the legislation and regulations that shape the system. So all of this comes into consideration when we talk about textile value chain. And now to make the transition towards UNEP's understanding of circularity in the textile value chain, we are conceptualizing that as a model to transform the current textile economic model, which, as we know, is still mostly linear, towards a more sustainable future. And it really means that all of us, so the governments, businesses, consumers, financial sector, everyone needs to go beyond the current take, make, dispose industrial model to redefine growth and focus on positive society-wide benefits. And the underlying logic is that the materials that we have should be kept at the highest possible value as they move and are retained as long as possible along the value chain. So I think here it's also important to consider it's very crucial that we have the sustainable input towards circularity. So also, as Nicola was just outlining, what we can take, for instance, with energy efficiency improvements along the value chain. But at the same time, also considering that once the textile items are in the system, The problem that we have is that they are currently very much underutilized. And I guess Laura can speak to that a bit better than I can. But really, if we would extend the useful life of textiles that are already in the system, this would also mean that the value that went into creating those items stays in the system for longer. Now, what you can see here on screen is our attempt to put what is very complex into a graphic. So basically, here you can see the textile value chain, and in the lighter, the sort of pink-brown color, you can see what we call the value retention loops. So again, for us, circularity is not only about closing the loop in terms of making sure that materials at the end of their use are fed back into the system, but first of all, we have an overarching principle that is reduced by design. So by designing different business models, or also looking at product design decisions, how can we design out impacts already from a very upstream perspective? But then there are also other loops. So for instance, at the consumer, we have the loop of sort of refusing or reusing. We also have loops that are more about repairing or repurposing and so on. So there are different options that can be used. And maybe also to mention that all of this, of course, needs to be inclusive. So we also have to consider what moving towards more circularity means on the ground, what it means, for instance, for jobs in producing countries. So all of these are considerations we also have to take into account. Now, if we go to the next slide, in terms of the impacts of COVID, so this is what we had put in the report that Francesca kindly referred to that was published end of last year. So I think by now we already have more findings and we're a bit more aware, because at that time it was really sort of the first studies coming out about the impact. All of us, we know that there was a huge impact on the textile value chain from COVID-19. I guess what was interesting and shocking to see is that it was not necessarily new impacts only. It's just that the COVID pandemic basically further highlighted and exacerbated vulnerabilities that were existing along the value chain all along. And our research also showed, and this is also not news, of course, is that when we look at the value chain, the parts of the value chain that take place in developing economies and in regions that are more vulnerable and are also carried out by workers that do not have the social safety net necessarily, they are the lower value add stages, whereas the higher value add stages, they take place towards the end of the value chain and are often owned by sort of multinational brands or retailers. So of course, when COVID pandemic was striking, we saw different impacts along the value chain. So we know there were, at the fiber production, there were, of course, delays in terms of raw materials that did not come in, which then impacted also factories not being able to process those. We also know that, of course, with the lockdown, there was a cancellation of orders. So basically the factories, they had the orders already processed, but then could not sell them on, which also impacted the workforce. I think something that is not as much maybe sometimes in the news is also sort of end of life, how there were also, let's say, second-hand facilities and collection of textiles really collapsed because basically also the lockdown did not allow for that anymore. But I think, as we've also heard before, we saw also that maybe consumers are more aware of this now, and we've also all learned to have different aspirations, and maybe things like spending time with our family has become more important, for instance. Now, what's interesting maybe about COVID-19 outbreak and the impact on the textile value chain is it really showed again the urgency to transition from our current model, which is characterized by overproduction and significant impacts, towards a more sustainable and socially inclusive and circular model. And we can see that the demand is there, but it is still challenging. And I think what we found in our consultations that we're at the moment leading, as we're also producing a sort of global roadmap report that tries to outline what each actor of the industry can be doing. It's really about working together. So everybody has a role to play, of course. Some parts of the system are more in the leading role, or others depend more on them. So what we've heard a lot is that, for instance, SMEs that are producers, manufacturers, they really look towards governments and they look towards brands, but still they also have a role to play and they have agency. And of course, as consumers, we have a role to play, financial institutions have a role to play. So I think it's just important to bring all the voices together and then to prioritize and see where we have to move first. So just to show the last slide, so you have my contact details in case you have any questions, and we also have a newsletter that goes out regularly, and you can find the details on the link there. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Bettina. And so let me remind you that you can always ask a question to the speaker. There is a specific part of the platform where you can just send directly a message to the speakers, or always use the chat. So we'll get back to you, and thank you for the interaction. So Bettina was actually underlining once again what is the importance of a multi-stakeholder approach, and she also underlined the urgency of accelerating this transition towards circularity. So all the stakeholders are relevant, but we also understood that in order to truly accelerate, we also need new policy tools, new regulations, and this is what I would like to ask Mauro Scalia, actually, from EURATEX, is the Director of Sustainable Business at EURATEX. So according to you, Mauro, according to EURATEX, which are the most appropriate tools to boost circularity and the broader sustainability across textile value chains? And I know that you have a point on this, because you already published a document that is actually mentioned in the report, is the EURATEX 2020 Extended Producer Responsibility EPR so in textile products position paper. So we have read it, we have mentioned it in the report, but we'd like to listen from you.
Thanks, Francesca, and good day, everyone. Thanks very much for the opportunity finally to reconnect in presence. I must say I enjoyed the first coffee break in more than a year and a half. And there is so much diversity in this room, which I think is very important. I think we all need that, discussing this point. Addressing your point, I think there are, from our perspective, two items on which I can touch upon. The first one is what is happening in our world, in our policy-making world, and what the business can do about that. And of course, referring also to the question you just asked. The interesting thing is that in our world, things are changing very fast. Sometimes we perceive an immediate impact. Look at the energy prices. We can read now in the newspaper, it's projected to triple overnight almost, and people understand this change. But there are other type of changes. That's what we see in legislation. We have now, at the European Union level, about 11 pieces of legislation which are being developed. They don't change as fast as the energy prices, but the impact will probably be even stronger all over the value chain, consumption, industry, everyone else. We look at proposals which are going to be tabled down by the end of this year, probably a Christmas gift, sort of, when we will see proposal for helping protecting consumer for the greenwashing. We heard so much about greenwashing protection today, but also helping them in choosing what is a sustainable product. We'll see legislation on due diligence being discussed for such a long time, as also we heard this morning. Also how you define a sustainable investment, how to help companies who want to invest in sustainability, how to help financial industry to help them. And we also expect to see indeed a EU tax strategy. So for the first time, at least since I'm aware of, the European Union will make a dedicated sector strategy on textiles to change the way it is made, disposed of, and chosen. Now, as EURATEX, we ask many things, as you could have seen in the previous slide. One thing in particular is to help making Europe a global leader for sustainability. And there are many ways of doing that. We heard a lot also for the study that Bocconi has presented, some way forward for that. We believe policy can help a lot in making sustainability a competitive advantage and not a burden, to help consumer in choosing sustainable products, to help EPR systems, so a system designed to cover the cost of disposal products in a functional way, which is useful. And in that regard, as also the President mentioned today, data, the President of EURATEX, data are fundamentally important. And I think that's also the key value we have seen in the UNEC initiative, which was launched more than 3 years ago. So it looked like there was a vision already 3 years ago on the importance of data was growing. You need data for due diligence, for circular economy, for product environmental footprint. You need data for all of that. And we need to make it possible for the companies to use this data and not to draw in a jungle of different requirements. So essentially what we ask to the policymakers, help us to come to an agreement on what it is a sustainable product, how we communicate that to the consumers, and how we exchange data in the value chain. And I think as EURATEX, our role in that exercise, in this exercise, will be to helping the small and medium-sized enterprises to find their way in this jungle of standards and going towards one single standard, but also helping them to become truly digital partners in the supply chain and not to be cut off. And also having the skilled personnel in the company itself to process all this information. The second point I wanted to very briefly touch upon is what the business can do. And we think the business can take the initiative to support this policy making to deliver and helping also the way the business itself is today structured. It's clear it has to be changed. A lot of changes can be triggered and supported because companies have technical knowledge. Companies in our value chain, they know how to make textiles. And there is a lot which can come from that. And the Rehabs initiative, for instance, what EURATEX launched with its members and many companies, define a way to create a system to collect, sort, reuse, and recycle eventually up to 5 million tons of textile waste, which we know we have to collect, but we still don't know what to do with that. So that's very important. We need diversity in the value chain for that. We work from the chemical value chain to the luxury, to the sport, to the whole textile brand. And very last point after these elements that I touched upon, so an EPR, it's definitely a policy tool. The policy decision for making a market for textile waste. The last one I want to mention is market surveillance, because there is so much legislation which is being made. We need legislation which is enforceable and fairly enforceable by every authorities across the member states. We need the same rules, and we need everybody to comply to those rules. And that's, I think, it's also what makes legislation really driving the change and not just imposing burdens. So that's very promising. We're going to have a very busy Christmas time, I would say, and look forward also to discuss over the next days with all of you on these points.
Thank you so much, Mauro, once again, and looking forward to the updates in the next months. Yeah, thank you also for highlighting that an initiative needs to involve companies because they have the knowledge. We perfectly agree. And I'm sure also Laura Balmond agrees. She's lead of the Make Fashion Circular at MacArthur Foundation. Laura, I really hope you can hear us. We see you, and thank you for being here, even if virtually. So next time, we really like to have you here at SDA Bocconi School of Management with the UNEC. Laura, I would like to ask you, what is the MacArthur Foundation point of view of the roadmap to circularity that we have been discussing before? So what is your point of view? What is the point of view of MacArthur Foundation?
Well, hello, Francesca and everyone in the room. Hopefully you can hear me okay. It's been fantastic to really listen to the discussion this morning because reflecting over the last couple of years since we began the work at the MacArthur Foundation in textiles, I can just really hear the depth of discussion and the detail within which we are now getting into to explore how does this become a reality. And I think this is just, a huge step forwards into really understanding how do we move from talking about this to actually making it happen in reality. So I guess that's just a really positive reflection that I'm taking away from listening to this, and thank you for inviting me to be part of it. I think I will zoom out a little bit more and the work that we do. I think, just to reiterate, we've talked a lot this morning about the challenges and why it is so important to move towards a circular economy. And it's absolutely fundamental that as we do this, we really address the root cause problem and that we get into the very heart of the operating model of the fashion industry so that any approaches that we are taking are not incremental or are not just addressing the symptoms of the current linear model that we have. So this is really important as we look to these solutions that we keep this in mind. And remember that this is actually a really exciting opportunity. The figure earlier that we had published in our report of, almost $500 billion is left on the table each year in value, purely because clothes and the materials that they are made from are not used enough, or they end up in landfill. So there's already a huge economic incentive to shift the fundamental operating model. But on top of that, there is the opportunity to address the waste and pollution, as has been discussed already. And really, to fix the climate, we have to fix the economy. And as we were hearing earlier from our speaker, talking about the McKinsey research, that 63% of the solution can come from moving to renewable energy and addressing the energy within the system. That still means that almost 40% is down to how products are made and where the materials are coming from. So we have to take this overall system view to the solution. So at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and obviously we're very pleased to see a lot of the vision that we have for a circular economy reflected in the Monitor report, but it really comes right back down to how you design the system from the outset. And then it is crucial that we eliminate the waste and pollution through design, we circulate the products and materials, and that the inputs are coming from safe inputs that will actually regenerate to natural systems as a result, moving away from reducing harm, but actually to doing good through the work that we do. And so what does it mean for fashion? Well, for fashion, we worked during the course of the pandemic, actually, but we gathered input from a number of experts, some of those in the room today. Almost 100 experts provided input to a common vision and definition of what does a circular economy for fashion look like. And this is one for us where we ensure that clothes are used more through new business models, through increasing durability, that they are made to be made again. So they are from the outset designed to be disassembled, taken back and recycled, and that there's the supporting infrastructure there to actually facilitate that, and that they're made from safe, recycled and renewable inputs. And this vision, it underpins where we want to go and where we see the industry heading in the future, but it absolutely has to be enabled by increased traceability and transparency. So everything that has been mentioned about the project today really resonates and is going to be a crucial enabler to making sure we get there. So I guess from our side, we are encouraged. The transition is beginning to happen. We feel like we are at a proof of concept stage where companies are moving towards pilot projects. We're starting to see really bold ambition, and likewise policymakers are moving towards some of the intention and the action that is needed. Now, I guess what we want to see in our call to action is to increase the speed of this and actually accelerate this even further to make sure we can move from the pilot projects to transformation at scale within the timeframes that we need now. And as all of our other speakers have mentioned, the only way this is going to happen is, of course, through collaboration. So just to reflect on the Monitor report, I think, Francesca, it's a great piece of work to start to dive into some of the more specific areas and actions that can actually see that real action on the ground now. And with that, I'll hand back over to you.
So much, Laura, and you notice that I have not mentioned the sources that we use in the report to refer to Ellen MacArthur Foundation because there were too many, so it will take too many minutes actually to list all of them, so you will find them in the report, by the way, and of course, great sources of information. So thank you, Laura, thank you for the work that you are doing at Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And you mentioned, and we can go back actually to the topic of traceability for circularity. And I would like to call now Iria Mouzo Lestón, so head of circularity at INDITEX, to have also the point of view of a company, so INDITEX in this case. So Iria, thank you for being with us, first of all. And I would like to ask you, what is the INDITEX perspective on the priorities for garment and footwear companies to become circular, and why, on your point of view, traceability is so important for circularity?
So first of all, I would like to thank you for this amazing meeting and for the opportunity to really share our circular vision. Thanks to the rest of the panelists, some of them well known, and for the words, because probably what I'm going to say is very, very aligned because we are all collaborating with together, So because from INDITEX, what we believe for the future is that the future of our sector is really a circular textile system where products are made for last from safe, recycled, and sustainable source materials that can be recycled multiple times. And we truly believe that we are able to build a circular economy model. We will prevent waste generations. We will leverage the dependency on virgin raw materials. The products that we will make will be appropriate for a climate neutral future. We will be competitive, and also we can create job opportunities based on circularity. That's our vision. But we are aware that for doing that, so there is a huge technological, industrial, economic, and regulatory challenge. But the good news are that it can be achieved, and this is how we truly believe, with the joint effort of industry, consumers, and policymakers and different stakeholders. And for achieving that challenges, there are key priorities. And for us, the first one, we have like 4 of them. The first one is for sure, and from the perspective of the companies, the responsibility that we have with the eco-design to really bear in mind the whole life cycle of garments when we design, selecting responsible materials with low impact or a better impact, and selecting better production processes with renewable energy, as Nicola was saying, with less water consumption, and also preventing waste generation. A lot of discussions, even with the Make Fashion Circular initiative with MacArthur, were about that, about the responsibility that we have and the shared vision that we have about, really the eco-design and the circular vision for the industry. So the companies, we have to design with the full life cycle in mind, and really achieve to substitute virgin materials for new fibers and recycled fibers, really allowing for a circular economy for the industry. But for doing that, and this is the second priority, we have to create a secondary raw material market. And we can do this only through innovation. So innovation is key to really solve the current existing technical challenges that we have in order to textile recycle garments. So we need to accelerate and scale up textile waste collection, sorting, and recycling technologies, and really boost the market for secondary raw materials. And as Mauro was saying, to really developing an extended producer responsibility for textiles with a common understanding. So because many of our textile recycling technologies rely entirely on a well-sorted output to really obtain recycled fibers with the same quality characteristics to the virgin materials. And even after sorting, research and innovation is needed to develop a recycling technique for textile blends and to really enable disassembling, especially in footwear, for example, which is highly complicated. So now, textile-to-textile recycling and sorting technologies are currently being tested by us as brands and by all the recycling industry, and even from the spinners and the recyclers. But it needs to be exploited on an industrial scale together with fibers, blend, condo sorting, and technologies. And that's why it's so important that a project like the Rehab initiative that EURATEX is led with some members of the industry can be leveraged and put on scale to really foster competitiveness and really have this secondary raw material market available for the industry. The third priority for us is for sure traceability. So in this global changing environment, tracing who, where, when, and under what conditions all commercialized products are being manufactured, reused, or even recycled is key. So traceability is a cornerstone to really ensure compliance with environmental, social, and standards and human rights, and is one of the core elements for transparency, from fiber to final product, but for sure until the end of life. And finally, just to close, what Mauro was mentioning, harmonization. So we are living such a great opportunity from the policy perspective. So a new list of new regulations are coming that will foster the transition to circular economy. But we rely on the harmonizing power of legislation, and our sectors need clear and common guidelines and technical regulations to really avoid fragmentations. And we have the risk of the different national regulations that we need to harmonize them. So we have to move towards a common scheme for standard produce reliability and waste shipment. And we need to establish technical criteria for eco-design. So these new regulations will bring us the opportunity to really be aligned on that. We see this process as an opportunity, and we are ready and committed. But as we all were mentioned, both Laura, Bettina, and Mauro, it is a challenge that concerns us all: citizens, consumers, businesses, and governments, and each one has its own role. So we are really welcoming this opportunity for textiles. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, and yeah, a big applause to you from the audience. And so you underline how important is to harmonization for traceability, harmonization for circularity. It's a need. It's the only way to solve complexities and to create synergies among the different companies in the different parts of the value chain. Definitely, this is an important message that we share actually with the policymakers. So it's definitely a good starting point to have meetings like this, discussing and sharing also the different point of views. And I think and I feel that we are actually going in the right direction. It was nice to see that your roadmap is very consistent, let's say, to the roadmap that we have suggested in the report. So let me thank once again the companies of the Monitor for Circular Fashion, NLX, UNEP, EURATEX, MacArthur Foundation, and INDITEX for this very interesting panel. Now we, let's say, for a moment, exit the topic of circularity, but we'll get back to that also in the next panels. Now we'd like to, first of all, tell you that we may enjoy the break. So the break is coming, is very soon, actually. There is a lunch break for us, and online, of course, too. But before getting there, what I would like to do is to, since today is Fashion Week, actually, we are starting Fashion Week, is September 21st. Milan Fashion Week is starting today. So we have a message from Carlo Capasa, the president of Camera Nazionale della Moda Italiana, Italian Chamber of Fashion. And right after the video, I will give you also some indications on what to do next. But let's now welcome Carlo Capasa.
Good morning. It is a pleasure to be with you today, even if not in presence. I wasn't able to come because tomorrow starts the Milan Fashion Week and we are almost ready for the beginning. We at Milano Chambers of Fashion made sustainability one of the main pillars of our strategy. We started working on it back in 2011. And now we work on all different aspects of sustainability: environmental, social, and inclusion of diversity. All those aspects require the same attention. However, I do recognize that in the last couple of years, we are seeing a growing importance of the circular model in the fashion industry. We are working with several players and stakeholders to help the industry in adopting the new way of thinking and producing. For example, we work with UNECE, International Trade Center, and also the European Commission, where we are part of a working group on life cycle assessment. My short message today is to invite everyone, manufacturers, brands, consumers, but also opinion leaders and thinkers, since today we are in a university with many professors, to value traceability, because a circular model is not possible without knowing where something comes from: a piece of cotton, a bag, anything. Everything in every stage of the product life must be considered. I want to also to say how important to us is that the UN agencies like UNECE helps the industry in developing a system of traceability thanks to their commitment. Their programs and their technical documents are very, very important for all of us. Every company should seek for this kind of knowledge and support, because this is how the industry and the system can progress. Well, thank you, UNECE and SDA Bocconi for inviting me, and enjoy the conference. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. And so now, before getting to lunch, I would like to make you notice that you have received, actually on your desk, or if not, it will come soon, a kind present from UNECE. It's the mask of the Sustainability Pledge. So this reminds me to tell you that we have an hashtag that you can use for all the social media activity that you may want to do today, tomorrow, the day after. So during our 3 days event, please use the hashtag the Sustainability Pledge, tag us, UNECE, SDA Bocconi, School of Management, and after lunch we will actually enter into the Module 1, Scaling Up, the Sustainability Pledge and Toolbox, so you'll know much more about it. Now, lunchtime, lunch will be served at 1:15, so very soon. Please follow the welcoming team at the entrance of the auditorium, who will guide you to the restaurant. Enjoy the lunch, and also online. See you back sharp 2 o'clock. We'll start again. Thank you, and thank you all for this first half of the first day of the event. Thank you.